This is just a sample of the audiobook. To get the complete audiobook, access the link posted in the first comment.
Of the voters who send them there. It is altogether natural that we should want to know more about the virtues and the vices of the fellows we have elected to govern us. As we know more about them, we will know more about ourselves. The French political philosopher, Joseph de Maistre, said, "Every nation has the government it deserves." At the start of the 21st century, 42 men have made it to the Oval Office. George W. Bush is counted our 43rd president because Grover Cleveland, who served non-consecutive terms, is counted twice. Of the parade of presidents, a dozen or so lead the polls periodically conducted by historians and political scientists. What makes a great president? Great presidents possess, or are possessed by, a vision of an ideal America. Their passion, as they grasp the helm, is to set the ship of state on the right course toward the port they seek. Great presidents also have a deep psychic connection with the needs, anxieties, dreams of people. "I do not believe," said Wilson, "that any man can lead who does not act under the impulse of a profound sympathy with those whom he leads. A sympathy which is insight, an insight which is of the heart rather than of the intellect." All of our great presidents, said Franklin D. Roosevelt, were leaders of thought at a time when certain ideas in the life of the nation had to be clarified. So Washington incarnated the idea of federal union, Jefferson and Jackson the idea of democracy, Lincoln, union and freedom, Cleveland, rugged honesty. Theodore Roosevelt and Wilson, said FDR, were both moral leaders, each in his own way and his own time, who used the presidency as a pulpit. To succeed, presidents must not only have a port to seek, but they must convince Congress and the electorate that it is a port worth seeking. Politics in a democracy is ultimately an educational process, an adventure in persuasion and consent. Every president stands in Theodore Roosevelt's bully pulpit. The greatest presidents in the scholars' rankings, Washington, Lincoln, and Franklin Roosevelt, were leaders who confronted and overcame the Republic's greatest crises. Crisis widens presidential opportunities for bold and imaginative action, but it does not guarantee presidential greatness. The crisis of secession did not spur Buchanan, or the crisis of depression spur Hoover to creative leadership. Their inadequacies in the face of crisis allowed Lincoln, and the second Roosevelt, to show the difference individuals make to history. Still, even in the absence of first-order crisis, forceful and persuasive presidents, Jackson, Theodore Roosevelt, Ronald Reagan, are able to impose their own priorities on the country. The diverse drama of the presidency offers a fascinating set of tales. Biographies of American presidents constitute a chronicle of wisdom and folly, nobility and pettiness, courage and cunning, forthrightness and deceit, quarrel and consensus. The turmoil perennially swirling around the White House illuminates the heart of the American democracy. It is the aim of the American Presidents series to present the grand panorama of our chief executives in volumes compact enough for the busy reader, lucid enough for the student, authoritative enough for the scholar. Each volume offers a distillation of character and career. I hope that these lives will give readers some understanding of the pitfalls and potentialities of the presidency, and also of the responsibilities of citizenship. Truman's famous sign, "The buck stops here," tells only half the story. Citizens cannot escape the ultimate responsibility. It is in the voting booth, not on the presidential desk, that the buck finally stops. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr. Introduction. "The Iniquity in Florida," wrote the New York Sun about the presidential election, not in the year 2000, but in 1876. The newspaper was referring to that year's disputed balloting, which had pitted the Republican governor of Ohio, Rutherford B. Hayes, and his New York running mate, William A. Wheeler, against the Democratic governor of New York, Samuel J. Tilden, and his running mate, Thomas A. Hendricks of Indiana. As in 2000, the controversy was in part because of a dispute about African American votes, not only in Florida, but in other southern states as well. The matter was finally settled, as in 2000, but in the 19th century, unlike in the 20th and 21st, the dispute was not permitted to rest. During his entire term of office, his opponents, referring to Hayes as the fraudulent president, continued to question his legitimacy and attempted to replace him. Who was this source of contention, destined to become the 19th President of the United States? As one of the Gilded Age's chief executives, he is generally considered less important than the emerging industrialists and businessmen of that era. Yet, as his biographers, especially Ari Hogenboom and Harry Barnard, have shown, this verdict is unfair. Hogenboom called him a precursor to the progressive movement, remarkable both for his independence and his savvy. Barnard thought he personified the educated but typical middle-of-the-road American of his day, and both gave him high marks for his restoration of the powers of the presidency. And they were right. Hayes was not one of the greatest presidents, but he managed to serve out his originally disputed term without scandal and with considerable competence. He deserves to be remembered. Chapter 1. Background and Youth. Hayes had little in common with George W. Bush, his 21st century successor. Not only was his father not a public figure, let alone a president, but his father, Rutherford Hayes, Jr., died before the birth of his son. A New Englander, born in West Brattleboro, Vermont, he descended from a long line of Presbyterians who had come from Scotland in 1625 to settle in Connecticut. He had a common school education, had clerked in a store in Wilmington, Vermont, and then went into partnership with his brother-in-law, Joseph Noyes, in a store in Dummerston. Leaving for Ohio in 1817 with $8,000, he settled in the town of Delaware in that state to farm, trade, and invest in a distillery, Lamb and Hayes, a strange investment for the father of a future president who kept liquor out of the White House. An active Presbyterian, he was a strong supporter of education, both religious and secular. He died in July 1822 of a fever. Hayes's mother, Sophia Burchard, was also a descendant of an old New England family, whose paternal ancestor had arrived in America from England in 1634. Her father, Roger Burchard, was born in Connecticut and was a retail merchant in Wilmington, Vermont, who died at 45 years of age. At her husband's death in the summer of 1822, she inherited some land near Delaware, as well as an unfinished brick house in town. Rutherford Burchard, named after both parents, had been born on October 4, 1822, and moved into the new house the following year. It was a two-story brick dwelling on the northeast corner of William and Winter Streets, with a kitchen in an adjoining old one-story frame building fronting on Winter Street, and was not finished until 1828. At first, short on resources, the family had little furniture for its new home. A new bureau and stand, plain wood-bottomed chairs, a gilt-frame looking-glass, a good carpet, and cheap curtains for the parlor. The family consisted of the mother, the boy, Fanny, an older sister, and a brother, who drowned in 1825 while skating. Hayes's mother's cousin, Arsena Smith, lived with the family, as did her brother, Sardis Burchard, a lifelong bachelor. This uncle, a businessman and banker, became his guardian and virtual father figure. It was he who took charge of his nephew's education, provided funds, and in frequent letters gave him valuable advice after he moved to Lower Sandusky in 1827. Mrs. Hayes's income was derived from the rent of a farm some 10 miles north of town, and Rudd, as he was called, and his sister Fanny, whom he adored, and with whom he played and later steadily corresponded, loved to visit it. The tenants gave them colored eggs filled with sugar at Easter, pet birds, rabbits, and turtles' eggs, while the children busied themselves with sugar-making, cider-making, and the gathering of hickory and walnuts. Rudd was a sickly child, whose survival was at first doubtful. It was Fanny who was his protector and nurse, leading him about the garden and on short visits to neighbors. He was able to reciprocate when she in turn fell ill, giving her little rides upon a sled during her recovery. Together they boarded with Arsena and her new husband, Thomas Wasson, when their mother went to nurse their sick uncle, and it was Wasson who sent them to the local district school in Delaware, run by a fierce Yankee schoolmaster who was notorious for his floggings. In spite of their pleadings to be taken out, Wasson refused. When his mother returned, Rudd, in 1834, took his first trip, a journey to his relatives in Vermont and Massachusetts, which he thoroughly enjoyed. The next year, he visited his uncle in Lower Sandusky, thus starting a lifelong habit of enthusiastic traveling. In 1836, Rudd was sent to a new school, the Norwalk Seminary in Ohio. The seminary, a Methodist school run by the Reverend Jonathan E. Chaplin, was more to Hayes's liking than the previous institution, although he missed his sister very much. He was not fazed by his studies. On Composition Day, he wrote an essay about liberty, and on Speaking Day delivered a eulogy on Lord Chatham, both well done. In the next year, he was transferred to Isaac Webb School in Middletown, Connecticut, where, with his friend William Lane, he studied Latin and Greek. Although at first it was hard to keep up with the class, he quickly succeeded. He was very pleased with this school, as well as its director. Getting up at 6:30, he breakfasted, said prayers, and started his classes at 9. Dinner was at 12. On Saturday afternoons, he took long hikes, and he also began a study of French. That he was successful was clearly recognized by Webb, who wrote to Sardis Burchard, "Rutherford has applied himself industriously to his studies, and has maintained a constant and correct deportment. I think he will avail himself of the advantage of an education and fully meet the just anticipations of his friends. He is well informed, has good sense, and is respected and esteemed by his companions. He is strictly economical and regular in his habits, and has established a very favorable character among us." Unquote. Despite Webb's belief that he was too young for college, Hayes was anxious to go, and in 1838 entered Kenyon College at Gambier, Ohio. There, too, he established an excellent record. Enjoying his college career, he made several lasting friendships, among them future Supreme Court Justice Stanley Matthews, future Michigan Congressman Roland E. Trowbridge, future Ohio Attorney General Christopher Wolcott, and future Texas politician Guy M. Bryan. The Texan, later a lawyer and state legislator, became a particularly close companion with whom he remained on the most friendly terms almost to the day of his death, in spite of their differences during and prior to the Civil War. It was also at Kenyon that he started his diary, an invaluable source for his career, which he continued to keep to the end of his life. Joining the Philomathesian Society, a literary and theatrical organization, he was able to engage in his favorite pastimes of reading and partaking in discussions. With a number of friends, he founded a friendship club, Phi Zeta, which adopted as its motto, Phila Zoe, friendship for life. At the same time, he perfected his speaking ability, delivering speeches to the society and to the college. For vacations, he generally went to Columbus, where his sister, now married to William A. Platt, a jeweler and businessman, had established her home. One of several speakers on graduation day in 1842, he chose as his topic college life and discussed its many advantages. As valedictorian, he addressed the school president, whom he praised for his closeness to the students, the faculty, and his fellow students. In view of the fact that he intended to become an attorney after leaving Kenyon, he began reading law at the office of Sparrow and Matthews in Columbus. Studying Blackstone and Chillingworth, while also learning German, he absorbed a great deal of legal lore. His uncle, however, thought he ought to have a regular legal education and insisted that he go to Harvard. Thus, in 1843, traveling by way of Buffalo and Niagara Falls, which, after an initial disappointment, he admired, he entered the Cambridge Law School. He liked Harvard as much as he had enjoyed Kenyon. "The advantages of the law school are as great as I expected to find them, and the means of passing time pleasantly even greater," he wrote to his uncle. Because of his previous studies, he was able to attend all the recitations without overexertion, and he was particularly influenced by lectures of Supreme Court Justice Joseph Story and the famous lawyer, Professor Simon Greenleaf. These two excellent teachers' style and learning became a model for the young student. He followed a strict daily routine. Rising at 6, he exercised before breakfast, then on Mondays studied law until 11, German till 2, moot court till 7, and in the evening wrote out his notes while turning to Whatley and Chillingworth. On Tuesdays, he perused